Welcome, dearest colleagues, to iAfrica Media, the biggest media platform for all things eye care on the African continent. I'm your host today, Obi Malope, all the way from South Africa, the motherland. And today, it's a very special and dear podcast interview that we have today because I'm with a dear friend and colleague whom I was in the same class with many moons ago, and is none other than Elizma. Elizma, how are you today, Elizma?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Obi, and thank you for having me on your platform. I'm very excited to be here.
No. The pleasure is all ours. And the reason why we wanted to get you on the platform today is that you have been part of a practice that when you started there, it was in a particular state. And you have built it into a reputable brand. And so in that process, you get married, you have children, you go through various challenges. There are multiple dynamics that are involved in building an independent practice. Past few years. And so it will be important to be able to connect you with the continent of Africa and all the eye care professionals who are aspiring to build incredible reputable to optometry. And so for me, or for Africa Media, we are super excited. If you don't mind just giving us a short introduction about who you are, how did your journey in eye care start?
Thank you, Obi. I studied with you in Bloemfontein, as you know, but I actually grew up in Paarl in the Western Cape. Beautiful place, still stays very close to my heart. And so after studying, I came back to Cape Town, and I've always enjoyed pediatric optometry. I always found it very challenging. So I started to pursue a career in pediatric optometry. So I identified a practice that was focused on behavioral optometry. And that's how my journey started. I started working with a great mentor, Johannes, and he taught me so much. And I was in the lucky position that after a few years, he wanted to sell, and I've already been established in the practice by then. I've been there 6 years by that time. So it was an easy transition into the practice owner. It felt very natural, but I have to say the business part, it's tough. We never study anything at varsity. I don't know if the course has changed in the meanwhile, but while we were studying, you never study business. You don't know anything about ICD-10 codes, which medical aid goes where, which code goes where, which rate goes where. But also, for me, the most challenging part was learning how to manage a team that was friends and now suddenly became colleagues and looked up to me. So it was a very difficult transition for me in the beginning. At that stage, our group we were two practices, one here in Durbanville, where I'm based, and one in Paarl. And I did not know the Paarl people as well. So I had to travel to Paarl quite a lot, build relationships with my team there. And eventually we branched out and we now have 4 practices. So it's been a journey. I still try to base my practices on pediatric optometry. We do see the whole family, of course, but we provide behavioral optometry, visual perceptual tests, dyslexia tests. So that is where we specialize in.
Wow. Lovely introduction. So we're going to unpack all those different elements because when we were in university, there were not a lot of optometry practices, especially independent optometry practices with job opportunities. Most people ended up going to work for the franchise companies. So what did you do, or how did you position yourself in getting that opportunity? What were some of the practical things that you did that got you the opportunity in that particular practice where you got to be able to have the opportunity to start?
I did a course through the Pediatric Training Academy.
Wow.
Through this course, I connected with a lot of like-minded optometrists, built relationships. And at that stage, I was based in public healthcare at Bremer Hospital here in Cape Town. And eventually, I leveraged off those relationships. So I started locuming, starting to see these optometrists in their practices, see what they did. And I was very very happy and very lucky that the position opened at VDM Optometrist. So,
Wow.
yeah.
And how long was this after university where you made the decision that, you know what, I'm still fresh out of university, my mind is still fresh, I'm tired of studying, but I want to expand my clinical skills. So what was the time frame between when you left university to when you furthered your studies with this particular course?
I was hunting for this opportunity from day one.
Wow.
So I wanted to be in Cape Town. That was my first goal. So I first placed myself here. And I've always tried to stay fresh with children. So I did my own research. I stayed up to date with journals. And I saved for the pediatric training academy course. And eventually I could afford it about 4 years after university. So that's when I started my
I actually remember no one fought more with Professor Rasengani than you did.
Yes, that's true. You know,
now it explains it. Now it explains why you're fighting her so much, because you actually wanted more. You wanted more because you knew that this was your career path that you were going to be focused on and choosing. So now it makes sense that one could always pick up your passion. When it came to pediatric optometry, the way you were in class, I was like, what is she on about?
And when you're young, you think you know everything. So you do have the guts to raise your voice. Looking back, I'm actually a little bit ashamed. I've learned a lot since then. I've also learned my place. So, but Obi, I was in a difficult situation after school where financially it was a bit tough. So I started working as a 16-year-old. And eventually, I was very, very, very lucky, once again, to, in matric, go for routine eye examination and sort of wangled myself into the practice. And I started working on weekends and holidays in this practice. It was also a community practice in Paul, seeing children, seeing older people. So it was a very, very well-established and a good range practice. And I used to take the fundus photos. That was my work. I took fundus photos the whole day, and I learned so much. So even before studying, I already had a bit of a basis to get from, a basis of knowledge that I could tap into. And so even as a student, I didn't have student loan, so I had to work. So weekends, I was working at practices. After classes, I worked at practices. So that's where I really tapped into knowledge about lens products, knowledge about contact lenses, and just seeing how different optometrists treat their patients, how they work with their patients, how they engage. And that sort of shaped the optometrist I wanted to be. I saw what an optometrist in a community looks like, an optometrist in a mall looks like, and what the different challenges are they face. So I think I came from a background of a lot of diverse knowledge being placed into different practices from a young age. So yes,
Wow, I love that. And you raise such an important topic. I know we never discussed this, but this is South Africa. I mean, we in Africa, and sometimes you would look at a white optometrist and make the assumption that every white person comes from privilege. And you then think that, this person can afford everything. This person comes from a privileged background. It's easier for them. It's not as easy for us as Black people. And now I'm listening to you and I realize that because of where you are coming from, you already knew that certain things you're going to have to work your butt off in order to get to the level that you wanted to be. So I'm super excited that you did not sort of like make or have the excuse to say that you can't be able to do this or you don't have access to these opportunities, but you actually started working from an early young age to be able to say, I'm going to put myself in a position where I can attract the necessary opportunities that will take me to the level that I aspire to be. And I was similar. I worked at varsity, I worked in high school. And so I'm super excited, even more now, to learn about your journey into where you are now as we continue with this podcast interview, because my oh my, how you entered the industry. It's like you stayed focused from the onset in terms of, okay, I want this, I'm going to go and do this in order to get there. So now that 4 years later, the opportunity presents itself for you to buy into the practice. All along, you have been an employee, drinking coffee with everyone, smiling, having employee type of jokes. Now the transition to then flip. I'm now going to become an owner. The previous owner helped you with the transition, and how did that process work? If you don't mind unpacking that for us.
Yeah, so the previous owner went on a sabbatical for a while. So I was in a position where I was the optometrist in the practice. We had a practice manager and we communicated well. So we had good teamwork. And eventually when I took over, the previous optometrist, Johannes, he never came back to practice. So I was already the established optometrist, the person that the patients ask for when they walk in. So yes, it was a big challenge to get used to this new role. We celebrate a very, very good company culture at VDM. So we've got very, very good teamwork, good communication, and it's something that's very important to me. I want to check in with all my colleagues. They know me, and I celebrate their little wins as well. So we have a good company culture. So from the beginning, although leading comes very natural to me, I never saw myself as the boss. I've always been everybody's colleague. I still chat with everybody. I still drink coffee with everybody. I know some of the jokes do dry up when I walk into a room. I know there's a little bit of a, I won't say a vibe, but there's always a little bit of caution. But I do try to stay open and approachable to all my colleagues.
Wow. I love that. Now, you mentioned earlier on in your introduction, funny enough, I wrote this down. So for me, I took down notes as you are writing, the four C's. So I'm going to use this in another session. You mentioned company culture, checking in with your team, celebrate every single thing or life event that happens with your team, and always work on communication. And I did a bubble here and I wrote it as leadership. So this is very interesting how you summarized that approach in terms of how you navigated the transition. Now, you mentioned earlier on in your introduction that we were not taught in as much detail the business side of things.
Not at all.
While you are in practice working as an optometrist and working your way up, what are some of the, if you don't mind, practical things that you did to equip yourself to be able to say, this is how a practice runs? Because there's a young optometrist right now who's probably going to be watching this, aspiring to one day have their own practice, and they don't know where to start. So what are some of the practical things that you did that helped you understand the business aspects of optometry a bit better in your journey?
So I'll tell you what I did, but I'll also tell you what was the most valuable.
Okay.
So I tried to do a few Udemy courses, trying to understand a bit about business, about marketing, about Google AdWords, about social media, everything. And most of it just went straight over my head. As you know, in varsity, you have that 6 months accounting. That's what you have as that you can classify as business, which was actually matric accounting. So honestly, walking into a practice, taking over the reins, that was very, very difficult. And suddenly you have to think about profit margins. You have to realize that you have to keep the lights on, you have to pay salaries. And for me in the beginning, that caused a lot of anxiety. I was very worried that I won't be able to pay one of my colleagues in the end of the month. So for the first few months, I was very, very stressed about every single cent. And then I realized that I do have all of this knowledge from observing through years, from especially being a locum, working in practices that are group practices, working in independent practices, working in mall practice with where the profit margins are a bit higher, working in practices which are house-based. So I decided, okay, first I need to decide where I'm going to place myself in this optometry world, how I'm going to identify my practice, and then just tap into that knowledge. So yes, I tried the academic route, but for me, the most important knowledge base that I could tap into was previous just observing.
Wow.
And it's something that I'm noticing is quite a new trend with young optometrists that all tend to want to go into private practice or group practices, but I want to own a practice from the get-go. I see very few optometrists asking for mentorship opportunities, even
Really?
looking for a job. Yeah.
Weird, eh?
We have a shortage of optometrists here. There's a lot of locums, but even they are busy because there are very few optometrists wanting to work in a practice. For me, I was 32 when I took over this practice. So I had a lot of knowledge to tap into, a lot of work experience over years. And for me, that was the most valuable. So honestly, everybody has to find their own path. It was firstly just deciding where I need to establish myself, what type of optometrist I want to be, how I want to grow my group, and then finding my own unique spin on it.
Wow.
It comes from, it just honestly comes from working and observing for many years.
It's really strange what you're saying, that it's like shadowing someone for free. They don't do that anymore. I find that very strange. I remember with us, Chris and Charles came to lecture us, and I remember immediately, like a few months later, because I was struggling with contact lenses, my brother was living in Simonstown at the time. He was in the Navy. I called my brother and I said, "Hey, can I come and stay by your practice? How is it to travel from Simonstown to Durbanville? Because I think that's where Shaw's practice was at the time."
Yes.
And to travel to Chris's practice, I can't remember where that practice, the name of the suburb. And I got into a bus, got there, and it was, I think, June holidays or December holidays 6 months later. And I went and I just sat there and I learned hard contact lenses, orthokeratology, because I was like, let me shadow these guys because they seem to be the creme de la creme of the industry at that time. Here when we were in Bloom at the time at Varsity, I would go to Dina's practice, I would go to other people's practices, like you say, just to be able to expose yourself to different practice types and business models so that you can learn how they operate things. The clinical work that you do in Varsity, it does not happen exactly the same way in practice. So, I mean, it's so strange. If there's one thing to all the young people tuning in or that I watch this, get yourself a mentor. Get someone who has really been there, who has seen various aspects of the industry and has put in the work to be able to get to where they are, and shadow that person, probe that person, ask as many questions as you possibly can from that person. It's going to save you a whole lot of heartache years later. A question that I wanted to ask you is that whilst you're navigating this, when did you start your family? When did you get married? And how did that come into the flow?
So that was actually a bit of a mess because I took over the practices in September 2018 and I got married in October 2018. So it was a crazy time, and I honestly don't know how I went through it. And being a bit of a control freak, I planned the whole wedding. I didn't have a wedding planner. So it was a crazy time. But it also taught me that some things in life are a bit more important. So even though it was such a crazy time, I really tried to stay present in the last bit of being engaged, that last bit of excitement before the wedding, and just submerge myself in all those feelings. So it taught me a very valuable life lesson from the get-go. We don't have children. We've got 2 dog children that are very spoiled, which is my fault. And I have an amazing husband. He's just been my rock. He always supports me. He understands very little from of the optometry world. He's a software developer, so a lot of it goes over his head. But he allows me to vent, he encourages me, and so it's all about finding that balance and creating, making sure you cherish the important moments. You stay in the moment.
I like that. I like that. I wanted to ask you, coming back to the practice, now you're in it now. You get it in 2018.
Yes.
And we all know what happens 2020 with the pandemic. At that stage, you were still running the 2 practices, right?
Yes, that's true.
And now it's 4. What are some of the challenges that you have experienced, if you don't mind going into owner-employee type of challenges that you have experienced, where there was a situation that challenged you because you had not experienced it from a leadership, ownership point of view, and how did you navigate if there was a situation like that? And then when the pandemic came, how did you, because I've seen your practice, I've been at one of your branches in Cape Town, I think it was last year. Oh my, world-class practice that you have. And so for me, what are some of the challenges that you encountered in this past 5 years where you did not have prior experience to dealing with situations like that? And what did you do to navigate past some of the challenges that you have experienced in the last 5 years as an owner? And then we would follow up with what led to the decision of expansion as a follow-up question to that.
Yes. So I think my first challenge was when the previous the previous owner was a man. So now suddenly a woman took over. And there are always some challenges that comes with that. So some of my previous colleagues, they weren't very comfortable with the change from a man to a woman, or even just the leadership style that's changed. So unfortunately, about 3 months in, there was some of my previous employees that resigned, and it was over the busy period, as you know, it was around December, Jan. So it was very tough, but it also created an opportunity for me to fill my team with people I really believe in. So I always try and employ people that come from different backgrounds, not necessarily optometry backgrounds. So I've got people that were in sales before, I've got people who worked as managers before, and they all bring something very unique to my team. So that was one of my first challenges, is just settling, making sure everybody is happy. And as you know, yes, COVID struck. My one practice, my Dyslexia practice, was in a strip mall at a stage. So we were actually very, very busy. I think patients did not feel as comfortable going into malls, but they were very comfortable going into a little optometry practice next to a Pick and Pay.
I'm that person.
Yes. And then our Paul practice really struggled in that time. The Paul Mall was extremely quiet. A lot of the shops closed down. So the Cambridge practice could carry the Paul practice a little bit in that time. And what we did is we worked in 2 shifts, so the 2 shifts never mixed. So if somebody got sick, we still had a backup shift. And some of the Paul people started coming into the Dyslexia practice to help, since they were so quiet. So yes, I was very lucky that the Cambridge practice was busy. The Cambridge practice has a very unique community feel. This area is very, very support local business. Everybody knows each other. You go into Pick and Pay, you spend an hour there because you speak to some of your patients in the aisles. It's a very, very nice practice. So I had a lot of patients who needed contact lenses in the hard lockdown, and I used to go and deliver it at their homes, drink a cup of tea. So we were always very busy in that time, which helped. So luckily I had the Cambridge practice, which was in a unique position at that stage to carry the Paul practice. And then as soon as everything slowly returned back to normal, the Paul practice started to pick up as well. Our big thing is our Cambridge practice is a very old practice. It's 23 years old this year, and we don't have the physical space for a second test room. So I started looking at where my patients were coming from, and I realized a lot of my patients were traveling from Brackenfell, which is about 20 minutes away from here. So I decided the next logical step would be to create a practice there so that those patients can go to a closer practice. and then create a little bit more space in my Cambridge practice for patients from Durbanville and from Bellville. So that is where the expansion came along. Yes, and then about a year after I opened the Brackenfell practice, which is also a unique practice, it's based next to a hospital or a medical center. So we've got dietitians there, we've got OTs and speech therapists. So it's a very nice mix, but a completely different setup. About a year after that, one of our classmates, Alan, who studied with us, he contacted me. Yes, and he had a practice he wanted to sell. And yes, it was also in Brackenfell. So now I've got 2 practices in Brackenfell. So very interesting.
Wow.
The difficult part is running different types of practices. So yes, it's all independent, but we've got a community-based practice, which we don't need to advertise for. It's very much word of mouth. It's got a very loyal, stable patient base. And then we've got our Brackenfell practice, which we also don't have to advertise a lot because we have the feet. We've got a feet from a medical center, from other specialities that's based there, and we get a lot of inter-referrals. But then I've got these 2 practices, the Glengarry and the Paul practice, which are pretty much mall-based. So different types of advertising are needed for the 2, different type of promos are needed for those 2, but they differ from our other 2 practices. So each has their unique challenges, but also a completely unique profile and patient type.
Wow, that is super, super impressive. Because I like how you clear on this practice serves this market, and or the market in which this practice is in will best be suited to have this type of approach. Now, how big is your team, and are you traveling between all these practices, or do you have optoms in these practices that are working there? And now you are finding yourself, how often does training and development take place in your practice? Because when I walked into your practice, everything, I think I was at the Durbanville practice, correct?
Yes, you're right.
Everything was very meticulous. Everything was like everything, step by step. Then I see you coming out with a patient, and you're talking about their dogs, their cats, their horses. It's like you really are engaged in not only their visual needs, but their overall well-being and their life. And then while all of that is happening, I'm sitting there by the couches and I'm looking at a massive TV screen with top-notch communication tools, where it's videos, it's practical tools that people can look at and say, wow, that's me, I need that. So do you have someone who helps you strategize, build all of these type of things, and how did the team around you, how does that work, and how often do you guys come together strategizing, planning? Because you said that your husband has got nothing to do with the optometry industry. So please help someone who's listening into this and is like, wow, I'm super inspired. Now I have got a plan of action, or I need a plan of action to get started. Can you please unpack that for us?
Yeah. So the difficult thing for me personally is I absolutely love practicing. So when I close my door and I'm seeing a patient, it's my happy place, especially when it's a kiddo, and I love it. So it comes very naturally for me. So when I ask about a patient's cats or dogs or horses, it's because I've built that relationship over so many, many years, and I've got a very special part of my brain that stores all of this information, which I don't know how it happens. It's there. And the big thing is my patients here in Durbanville, they become family. I said I run into them at the Pick and Pay. I see their whole family from granny to the youngest baby. So yes, I do feel very lucky here that we've got a community-based practice. So I fit in easily here. And yes, the difficult part is the challenges, the business challenges are taking a lot of time. It's a lot of admin, It's a lot of strategizing, there's a lot of marketing that goes into it. And I want to practice. So at a stage, I will probably need to expand my team to include somebody that can do a bit more of the business side, take a bit of the admin off my hands. But in the meanwhile, we've got a team of 11 between the 4 practices. and everybody's got a different role. So it was very difficult for me in the beginning, being a little bit of a control freak, to delegate, but I've since learned that my team they're capable. And maybe their process will be a little bit different than mine, but as long as the endpoint's the same, that's the only important thing. So I've got an amazing team member who does all my marketing. She is phenomenal. She's learned how to hack our website, so she manages the website. She manages our social media. She tracks how our ads are doing. So she's upskilled herself. And again, I've provided opportunities for her to learn. So if she sees a course that she wants to do, we buy it as a practice and she can do it in her own time. And she's actually started her own marketing firm. So she still works at my practice in Paul, but I'm one of her clients. So she's growing personally, and I'm very, very proud of her. And then we've got some of my other colleagues who are only invested in accounts or only invested in medical aid or does all the lab communication. So everybody's got their own unique role, and there's not a lot of strategizing going on. we take it day by day. We check in with each other. We're constantly on WhatsApp. So yes, it works. I try to go to each of my practices once every second week so that I see everybody. And if there are some things that we need to clear up, I'm there. It's difficult, especially in the summer months. It's difficult to find that time to go to each practice, but it is important to keep the lines of communication open. And as you said earlier, we just started a lab. So we've got our own cut and fit lab now. And we've always done our own cutting and fitting, but we've now took hands with some local optometrists, some other independent optometrists, and we're now providing a service to them, which helps. So I'm also very excited to say that we are now taking on a partner. So it's still very, very new, but we are growing our lab to serve the independent optometry community.
Wow. Elizma, I'm super inspired. How do you build trust? Because no one teaches us how to build trust at university, or it's a life thing. Life experiences help you to determine how to build trust. So in your case, you have to. I think it's a two-folded approach. Based on what you've said about your team, you are employing top talent, and not only that, you have made the decision to invest in top talent. Now, most optometrists will get scared to say, if I invest in someone, they're going to leave. And I'll be the one having to start again from scratch. In your case, you are very supportive of that investment in your people. But how did that process work? And then the second part of it is, what is your process around trust in terms of what are key elements for you that help you say, this is my checkpoints in building trust, which is a two-way thing between myself and my team members. How does that work for you?
So I build trust with my team members the same way I do with my patients. I try to be as genuine as possible, and I'm transparent in everything. I explain to a patient that, listen here, this is odd. It's something that I'm not sure of. It's something I think we need a second opinion on. Or it's something that I think you'll be better suited in a practice that works with specialty contact lenses, for instance. So I'm always very genuine. I know where my limits are. And the same way I'm with my colleagues as well, with my team members. They see me at my lowest point. I don't hide anything from them. I tell them when things are tough. I tell them when things are very, very good. They know who I am. They know the personal struggles I go through. And I think it helps. It helps that I'm not in a position of power. I'm not unapproachable. I'm not sitting there on the top and just barking commands, but we're working together. And they know me personally very well as well. So for me, it's staying transparent. And if you are grooming your team members to stay, you are doing it wrong. We need to be growing. We can't, as a practice owner, ever think that somebody will stay at your practice forever. We need to be uplifting. We need to be honing skills. And it should be a celebration when they leave your practice for a better opportunity. And it just provides opportunity for new blood.
I agree with you, because I'm a firm believer that if you have invested in someone and they came into your practice at this level, and then when they leave your practice, they are at that level, that means when you're hiring the next person, you're starting them from there.
True.
That means they're going to
Very
get to an even higher level. You should not think about it as you coming back here. That wherever the level at which a person has left, the next person comes in at that level, and you're going to take that person to an even higher level. So kudos to you for having that sense of awareness, because that's, I think, where most practices fail, is that they want to retain people that are going to work for them for years, but then that 10 years later, that person that has not acquired new skills that they can contribute to the practice in order to elevate the practice to the next level. And so the practice stays the same, because I'm sure you said, for example, the one branch had been in existence for 23 years. I'm certain, based on what you have shared with us so far, is that there are patients that have been coming to that very same practice from 23 years ago, who now walk into the practice and they're blown away by how much you have taken the practice to the next level, because your people are not staying the same, you're not staying the same, and most certainly your service offering is not staying the same. It's constantly evolving, which leads me to my next question then. Pediatrics is tough.
Yes.
It involves a long chair time. I went to a colleague the other day to go see them, and my appointment was for 4:00. I ended up seeing them at 5:30 because they were busy with a mom and son, which took way much longer, and the management of that patient it was very, very dynamic and complex. And they were in that examination room for 3 hours, from what I understand, because there were so many things that the optometrist was doing. So please explain to us, are all 4 practices pediatric orientated, or how do you navigate around the chair time, the general optometric services, finding the balance, and all of that?
Yeah. So I assume each behavioral optometrist do their own thing. A 3-hour appointment for a child, personally, I think it's very tough. It's very tiring. So I rather prefer to do separate appointments with follow-ups a few weeks from each other. But again, it depends on the optometrist. It also depends on the needs of the appointment. From a behavioral optometrist standpoint, there's a lot of interaction with other colleagues. You are interacting with occupational therapists, speech therapists, remedial teachers. I sometimes have to go to the school, go see learner support, have a meeting about a child. For me, that takes more time out of my day. All of the communication between the team, but I also realize that it's the most important part. So yes, it does depend on the needs of the child. I really do prefer shorter appointments more frequently than rather seeing the child over a week, maybe 2 or 3 times than one long appointment. And as you said, we do have a TV in the waiting room. We've got some movies on there so to keep the siblings busy. Or if while I'm dilating and the child needs to sit in the waiting room, we put a movie on and we try and make it as comfortable as possible. I have many kids who come in and they ask me, Tannie, bly jy hier? So you stay here. And I love it because it feels like it must have a home element then. They feel at home here. They enjoy the waiting room because it's a living room. So we try to keep the vibe as comfortable as possible. When it comes to the pediatric patient, the most difficult part is actually the parents. The child is easy peasy. The parents sometimes have expectations. They sometimes want to hear something, and now you're telling them something else. It's difficult. And there's a lot of parent guilt as well, especially if the patient has very poor eyes and it's already an 8-year-old or 9-year-old, and they realize that the child's been struggling at school because of eyesight. So there's also managing the guilt and explaining that the child's visual system is so unique. They've been hiding it all of this time. There's no way that you could have known. Yeah. So that's the difficult part. And even a day or two after the examination, I always encourage the patients in the test room. I always tell them, listen, I know there's a lot of information. If there's anything that you're worried about or stressed about, please send me a WhatsApp, give me a call, send me an email, even if it's a week after, and we'll clarify. And I always have patients about 2 days later I've got parents checking in with me and say, just listen, I forgot about this, or could you please just explain that again? I think it's important to keep the communication lines open and realize that parents are very worried about their children, so they will have a lot of questions.
Wow. I think one thing that is fascinating me about just listening to you is that there's a lot of optometrists in Cape Town, but you sort of like were very clear from the onset how you're going to differentiate yourself. And for me, that is super, super inspiring, because a lot of people get they get so focused on the competition that they practices that ends up sort of like being defined by discounts, price, deals, and all of that type of stuff. Whereas with you have this long-term view that if I'm seeing a 4-year-old, I'm going to be seeing this 4-year-old for the rest of their life. So there's a journey, there's a process that is involved. And I think how you have structured your business, it's so dynamic and so unique. What advice would you have to a final year optometry student now? What advice would you have to a 30-year-old who has worked in various practices but is despondent and discouraged about optometry right now, but they don't have options to leave the industry? They know that this is where they're supposed to be, but perhaps their working environment is frustrating. They have not been exposed, or they have not exposed themselves enough to various other types of clinical competency areas. What advice would you have to the beginner versus the one who's 10 years or so been in practice, and how do they then take themselves to the next level? What can they do in that situation, if you don't mind unpacking that for us?
So yes, you are right. There's a lot of optometrists just in my area. There's probably 10 or 12. A lot of practices are playing the discount game, the how low can you go game. And I refuse to take part in that game. My practice offers something unique. I worked very, very hard to be where I am today. So I will never discount on my prices for clinical services. Never. And I am surrounded with practices that asks a fifth of the price of what I ask for an examination, but still I'm busy. So I think you have to trust that you've got the skills. You have to realize what type of optometrist you want to be, what type of area you want to be in, what type of speciality you want to practice to set yourself apart. And then you have to trust the process. I've never chased the money. I've always chased the doing good. So I've been involved in my areas since the get-go. We do a lot of community work. We go to schools, we go to all-day camps, we go and clean glasses, we take care of the kids at the children's home. I'm involved. And I said to a colleague the other day, it feels like the more we do, the more we put ourselves out there, the more community service we do, the busier our practices are. So I'm not sure whether it's just karma or whether people are noticing it. But yes, and I've got so many suppliers who've been very, very supportive over the years. It's at the point where I pick up the phone and I phone my lens supplier or I phone a frame supplier and say, listen, we are doing this community project. We're going to this shelter. We've got 20 adults who need glasses. How can you help? And it's come to the point where I regularly receive deliveries here, and it's 1,000 cases. Literally 1,000 boxes of 1,000 cases with a note, please use this in your next charity project. So we've got a storeroom full of frames and cases and lenses which we try and use and utilize in charity projects. And it's just taken a momentum. It's just growing. So for me, as I said, I've never chased the money. I've never tried to be too involved with what my colleagues are doing in the practice down the street. I focus on us. I focus on our vision here. We try to do good. We try to serve the community, and we try to provide an exceptional service. And that's it. Very narrow-minded, but we focus on what we do and not the rest.
Wow. I love that. And this is so important. And so the advice, as we get to a close, the advice that you have to the final year optometry student who's entering the marketplace in a few months, and the 30-year-old who's frustrated? Or even if it's just, what advice do you have for the industry, basically?
I think no optometrist went to study optometry because they wanted to be a salesperson. Obviously, there was something about the human body that fascinated you. Maybe somewhere deep inside you wanted to change the world, you wanted to do good. But at heart, we're all clinicians. So my advice would be to practice, be a clinician, and forget about the sales. Yes, it's important. Yes, you need to keep the lights on, but do what you do best. Focus on your patient, and it will come back to you. That's my only advice. I know there's a lot of frustrations about eye care at the moment in our place, but we've created these frustrations. We've been pushing ourselves into the retail market, while we should actually be focusing on staying relevant in the healthcare market. We've recently done the GIO course, the diabetic retinopathy course. I could really advise it for everybody. It's honestly such an eye-opener, and it allows us to also tap into that market and chat with dietitians and chat with doctors and ophthalmologists and set up referral structures. So I think you need to stay relevant in the healthcare portion of it.
Wow.
Retail, some glass hats can do that. The Falco Milano in your local mall can do the retail part. But you need to do your best refraction and give your all to each every patient clinically. The rest
I love that. I love that. I love that, because, and that's how we take the industry to our next level, because unfortunately patients then don't trust us. They look at us and they come to our practices thinking that they can come and negotiate with us, and they don't go to negotiate with dentists, they don't negotiate with doctors, they don't negotiate with anyone in healthcare except optometrists. And for me, your approach and your advice in terms of, if every one of us focuses on the clinical aspect of our work, and we elevate our clinical standards of our practices to the highest possible level, optometry changes overnight, just like this. Because patients, the content, they wouldn't have an option. Everywhere they go, everywhere they turn, that would be the standard. But yeah, we've got a long way to go. Elizma, wow, I'm getting goosebumps. I'm going to play this back again and again and again. But I'm challenging you now. I'm challenging you now. You need to get on advisory boards. You need to go beyond the practice now. You gifted. You've got a gift. I think you don't realize how anointed you are with the gift of impact. You've got an amazing hand of leadership on your life. I just got a sense of that the whole time that I've been doing this interview with you. You need to be on advisory boards. If you look at eye care in the UK, Australia, America, there's people that are in practice, but they sit as consultants, advisory consultants for various companies, where they advise on strategy, leadership, the clinical aspects of optometry, various things. And even our very own Dr. Darrell Glover, who's the co-founder of iAfrica Media, he sits on various boards as an advisor. And it's people like yourself who need to be advising organizations, institutions, associations across the continent in what would be the best way for us to take optometry to the next level. So I'm challenging you over the next few years. You really have a gift. You really, really have a gift. I know you don't have time now, but as you get older and your practice is evolving and your team operates and functions like you, and you then want to transition into another area, honestly, please do consider more leadership roles within the space of eye care as a whole, globally, because you are gifted, my dear friend. You are very, very gifted.
Obi, thank you for that kind words. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much
thanks.
for just allowing us to do this. It was such a privilege, such a blessing for us to have had you as part of our platform today. Any parting, where can people connect with you?
So people can always just find me on Facebook or find me on email, or our addresses or email addresses are on our website. And as closing, I just want to say that I am very pro growing optometry in South Africa. So if there are any young optoms that wants to connect, ask questions, want to come and intern a bit, or just approach me to assist with in any way, especially when it comes to pediatric optometry. I know it's a difficult field to be in. Then please do reach out.
Wow, thank you so much. Everyone, what a fantastic episode. If you're not connected with Africa Media yet, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, connect with us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. Most importantly, do check out Elizma's website as well as social media profiles. Elizma, what's the website here? Let me write it here for us.
It's vdmoptom.co.za.
Let me just. How's the weather there in Cape Town the past few days? Yo.
It's cold and rainy, but at least today we're having a little bit of sun, so it's definitely a do your laundry day today. But I see it's a lot of rain coming again on over the weekend, and unfortunately we had floods with the previous amount of rain. So I'm hoping that the water levels, the ground is not too saturated, that we won't have floods again.
I hear you. I'll put the website on the link that we share for this.
Thank you, I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Stay blessed.